4 minutes to start, but we need Elijah.
We do.
I believe, are you all logged in? But Elijah is not logged in, right? He's coming in here to judge, okay. Sure.
For the live stream, you know, you can just search on YouTube. I think my mom. Oh, yeah, okay. That's what
Did you write your email down for me?
Yeah, of course. My mom, I won't get it. She has no idea what's going on, but she likes it. So,
Moral support.
yeah, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so my understanding is that y'all are gonna deal with Lincoln online, right? I don't need to do anything with that.
Was your last day in person?
Just fine, yeah.
I'm just trying to track down Elijah.
Yeah, I sent the email already.
He's still not online, correct?
No.
Okay.
I should have just sent y'all the link to the stream.
I'm not on camera, right?
I'm sorry?
I'm not on camera.
No, it's facing forward, so it can only.
I got your third judge. All right, as soon as Elijah's ready, we're gonna fire this up and go.
this is like.
Live stream.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, friends. You know where Sarah is?
Up at the tab, what do you need?
Okay, just so they know, if a round is like delayed, and we have to walk back.
Yeah.
And I have to prep them, and we have to eat. It's kind of difficult if they read the pairings and send out the pairings as soon as we get back.
Yeah, okay, I'll share that we've had some schedule, yeah, we're.
It was, it wasn't us.
No.
How much you go? Okay.
I just sent out another, I just added one of our observers to the chain.
Okay.
They'll be on it after the funny. The one in C is gonna be on it. So I added these.
Give me your piece on the one you see kind of.
If you would, since we're still waiting.
I mean, it's
We're not like,
yeah,
waiting,
it's-
like, we're still situated. It'll be very nice.
Okay, I'm good whenever.
Okay.
Excellent, thank you all, have a good debate.
Okay. Lincoln, are you good? I'm just gonna assume.
Don't
I'm not
don't-
listening now.
That is.
Yeah, no.
Man, we both listening.
Lincoln, are you good?
Doggy, so make sure you keep yourself on. Like, you're not muted, like,
Yeah.
Oh, that's the live stream.
No, I'm trying to
Should be
see.
good.
Is he? They're talking today, or this? There's no volume.
Yeah, let me just chat.
Right, yeah. I think they have Lincoln. I've been told that we don't have
Okay.
anything.
Where's Lincoln?
Lincoln's on.
And he's there. Okay, cool.
We'll manage it.
All right.
Yeah. We're
Cool.
not on Lincoln, dude. Number one.
I mean, I kind of like that. I'm good with that.
Well, Lincoln just got hit. So why?
Absolutely, I'm a team. I borrowed it from Wyoming. So.
Well, I only need like 2 for now, but I don't know.
Are you trying to flow the whole debate? Okay, we'll flow.
Lincoln, are you good? I can't
Answers on that
see you.
You're just better.
I'm good.
Right
Okay.
out.
He is good.
Can you
No.
focus on something?
Wait, why are you willing to pull me that?
Oh, this is right there.
Good night.
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay. Sweet.
Wait, is this mine? Oh, is this one of you? Okay.
Plan the United States program to substantially increase prohibition on tacit collusion, at least including an automatic antitrust probes in industries that are highly concentrated, have rising margins in year-over-year price hikes in excess of 10%. DOJ advantage. Relax no corporations accountable is key to DOJ credibility day 21. Further, accountability for legal wrongdoing has been a significant catastrophe for America. Announcement of a new approach to corporate crime attract relatively little attention or be any credibility to the DOJ's promise of action is actually taken. Although limited justice can gain credibility on the record of corporate crime is actually penalized and holding corporations accountable for antitrust is key. Code 21. Pro's top priorities is restoring the reputation of justice, rebuilding the trust in this institution, given the financial difficulties caused by COVID. We will anticipate a focus on corporations on the antitrust front. Expect to see an increase in enforcement, and that's a key perception used from auction rule law for 21. Justice plays a leading role protecting democracy. DOJ serves the power from enforcement as rule law and democratic governance, but the flip side is also treating legal compliance as a creation of exercise local disintegration of rule of law, not just the DOJ, but its government as well, and erosion use democratic trust about global backsliding down 21. Florida American democracy, but a profound global consequences of development and appropriately damaging the global democratic cause and backsliding rule of law, ensure regulating body shall be abused power of the U.S. outside the land, and imports that source political diffusion, making an example happens in the U.S. Likely to determine the fate of democracy around the world, whether democratic reversals turn back or means or if momentum and democratic erosions versus World War XIX. Other words, related to reach affirmation and increasing China demands admission in SCS, the reason implosion of democracy of the World War II and building interference and driving democracy and erosion continues to be made. Reach the point where democracy goes bankrupt, suddenly plunging the world in the World War, and inflation advance, inflation due to cheap renewables, which one too. Think about it, clean energy is constantly falling prices ever cheap clean powers over relentless price declines as made renewables the cheapest source of electricity in the past year. Your prices for solar are more than 50%, and cheap renewables are a game changer in solving World War II. Renewable energy is cheaper than previously thought to be a game changer. Climate prices have long problem and anticipated they are fast becoming cheaper than fossil fuels. More opportunities in green energy could combat climate change. The energy sectors and price of record scaling up renewables good news for 1.5 degrees Celsius target renewables for an economically attractive phase out ensures the immediate climate ambition and cheap renewables allows for rapid reduction of fossil fuels as mission to avoid catastrophic climate change carbon 21. Well, with catastrophe, we used to believe in the big reduction in GHG would be difficult and expensive. Over the past years, we experienced a technical cost of solar and inflation low to rapid reduction of fossil fuels and warming cost extinction of 21. World warming can be or so rapidly humans will be in peril. Rebound glues include gas from looking fluoride, cinnamon, frozen methane deposits warming could threaten humans by acidification will lead to massive dioxide sea level. Humans will not have time to adapt to impacts will lead to harsh respiratory. But stressful warming will weaken human immune system. Humans that spiral warming likes becoming pandemics and more cause extinction due to war system deaths, problems make resilience and adaptation possible. Year 21. Climate change and the potential push humanity across universal laws by changing ocean circulation patterns, causing massive sea level rise and increasing global extreme events. Even if humanity is resilient, each catastrophe could occur. But these impacts occur simultaneously. Modern societies have hidden fragilities and inflation shocks, but the connection between climate change, biosphere integrity is strong. The environmental change problem produces social changes that work against adaptation to global system death problems, reduce self-perpetuating catastrophe, the resources required to adapt beyond the means of dueling societies, disrupting the global food system that can create exacerbate conflict, extensive global review and warming exercise about climate change to increase international conflict. Empirical studies highlight climate change impact as first multiplier and about the absence of the wars due to the system ability to diffuse some climate change ban, right? This rising food, water, energy security can increase probability of necessity and fossil renewables option key to grid resiliency. Have 21. Improve grid resilience with renewables and updated grid IO, stand disruption from extreme events or attacks, use opposite decoupled battery demolition as they have no feature decarbonized grid such as efficient storage, distributed generation, and structural resilience, and the grid increase decarbonized grid will provide a robust and reliable distribution and grid cloud cost extinction by 19. The grid is vulnerable to geomagnetic storms, EMP, and kinetic attacks, appearing to local geomagnetic storms, almost inevitable. The consequences are likely to be catastrophic for Chicago tech require electricity reproduction will collapse to detect that 2% can feed the other 98%, and during inflation will spur populist resurgence until 21. Inflation is making the risk is proved that enduring and cause economic, political, and economic pains that populist and the price of things because it's topical political agitation of inflation may be political harm for populace and populist cost extinction. They are directly exceeding normal flexing is worth like 21. Humanity becoming extinct without out of control, super intelligence, bioterrorism, totalitarianism, populist have little for action, populist parties can be immediate issues that success of populist terms of sideline dangers, climate change due to world strength, populist side like catastrophic risk society can massively reduce odds of catastrophe by ensuring big deaths by natural resources we can safeguard species next hours by combining the affections of COVID with the deadly of low asteroids, two volcanoes and unknown sea guys tackling extent to risk of political harm, crucial humanity survival, populist focus on the short term means or in nature, missing the threat that can kill us for each existential associated sensible approach that curtail dangers of better policies lead to a stable world and by foreign policy solve existential changes now will populist research and zoom to kill its land. The populist challenge of foreign policy, domestic environment, large term challenge of multi-lines, a serious complicating factor. This landscape will influence how quickly Biden can change course, who throws humanity influence on climate problems, trade and COVID, Biden's period lines free range, engage multilaterally meet transactional challenges, existential and inflation is really a problem. Tacit collusion corporations use the pandemic as an excuse to high prices. Biden action outcomes sees, but sustained pushes keep us all game going on. Companies are raising prices well above increases in costs. Their only antidote to action against corporate power assets are seizing once to generate shocks to raise prices to their total higher than 2019. Biden took total action above sustained pushes key assets are not hiding. They're hiding with their most. You got earnings. All you don't need a CEO and smoke for the general price. Everyone's watching each one another and knows when to react. But Biden executed multi-step asking the FTC to look into price gouging and gas justice to the largest producers. The administration has been addressing concentration and meat processing action consulting corporate behavior, announcing intent to enforce against restrictions or limited stop and will change their policy and CEOs admit their price gouging prohibiting tacit collusion solves solar 21. This is helping to drive inflation more than we are in electric schools that prohibiting price fixing profits are at a 7-year record just for living. Naval corporations made $1 trillion in a year profit. Today, $1.73 trillion. Held corporate America kept the same profits. Inflation will be 3.8, not 6.8%. That's a big difference. Research for mass evidence about inflation 56%. Told digital inflation has given them the ability to raise prices beyond what's required. Then executive myth using fake stories by inflation firms are allowed to raise prices in coordinated manner as long as there's no proof they're working together over the economy, ensuring that would help lower prices of bearing the bond. This kind of price can be powerful. And companies are using the pandemic as a pretext for tacit collusion, automatic antitrust probes to deter price hikes causing inflation and for rapid price drops in 21. Antitrust be used to fight inflation. No changes to corporations need to explain why prices are skyrocketing. The pandemic provides a cover free as pretext for coordinated price hikes. Automatic antitrust probes in industries that meet the three criteria highly concentrated rising margin. The year-over-year price hikes in excess of 10%. But concentrated industries are noticing discourage implicit or tacit collusion from a cost benefit perspective. Automatic antitrust probes will make cartels who talks about raising prices collusion really taking will be matched by chaos and the pandemic firms would not be slave by raising prices. Automatic probes would address under returns. Then was that antitrust can curb price hikes, brief prices rose every month until they suddenly drop price while Biden was on the key after Kennedy used the bully pulpit to launch still price hikes forcing within days and antitrust is key experts experience boxing on 21. Competition policy was a manifesto to higher inflation without a certain competition policy. Such market players would get worse from competition policy, but those like more decisive when competition authorities with their in-depth understanding of market dynamics which have a waste of the policy making people must be granted genuine opportunities to show their expertise. Competition is critical to ensuring markets deliver on lower prices. Those authorities must become guidelines ensuring policymakers remain geared toward competition. And new Biden DOJ initiatives last week thumbs every day average Hill Strong 21. Just launch initiative partially companies that exploits supply chain disruption to overcharge the Biden scrutinize oil producers, ocean carriers, meat processing, other industry for raising prices amid inflation. One of the things that Biden's remedy price gouging effort, but without prohibiting tacit collusion, none of these cases are winnable while it's The court settled that Sherman did not prohibit tacit collusion, and doing so, the court made it harder to stop collusion. The court required plaintiffs demonstrate that more than tacit collusion, decide motions to dismiss plaintiffs could survive without direct evidence of injury, but such smoking guns are unlikely to be found prior to discovery. And closing the door to tacit collusion under Sherman, the court nearly did the same for explicit collusion, and enforcement on price fixing is already had now by Houston 20. The court has repeatedly condemned collusion of antitrust agency prior to cartel activity. Court made it an essential prohibition of antitrust. The court described collusion as the supreme evil of antitrust and initially applied it. The agencies make cartels maintain their work, and sprawling DOJ retrial of poultry price fixing proves and thumbs for 21. DOJ gears up for a price fixing retrial. The government appears to be lining up more of the witnesses for retrial of the trial price fixing scheme. The government has beat up its case, and antitrust tsunami now is forward to Wyoming. Monopolies are beginning to loosen the court's agency. Congress to take big picture as move forward, and the government is doing well just as seen by antitrust and moral maneuver moves forward on stronger groundbreaking antitrust concerns, but stronger antitrust dealmakers are afraid the floating legal challenges of the primary reason more class action suits are coming, and NVIDIA and Aerojet the McLaughlin 21. NBC's comment that 201 Street with Lockheed deal collapse. Lockheed abandonment of acquisition of Aerojet came a week after NVIDIA walked away from ARM. The lawsuit for the sole consequences to toughen antitrust and global crackdown on Share 22. Unlike the past, scrutiny can impact the bottom line. European and U.S. can put sharp limits on big tech regulators. Global European does an investigation that can lead to more than just speeding tickets orders that can cut off transatlantic data flows, decap digital advertising, delay major product changes, and force ongoing oversight and scrutiny more difficult. There's new momentum for regulation on a whole new level, and states password triggers their links towards Body 22. State rules are likely to increase companies for the password diversion and stringent obligations from that status quo to continuing companies that will have to hold the line across with legislators, increasing appetite for regulation combined with big tech to make tech capital's key strategy, make changes even more likely, and ocean carriers stop all Gallagher 21. New legislation would strip ocean carrier antitrust protections. White House cutting down on market power. DOJ will aggressively enforce shipping. White prices calling cars to just immunity and algorithm don't disrupt antitrust. DOJ is ready. Meeting 19. We should have handed about algorithm like an employee, and algorithm reigns in a firm's control. Therefore, the firm's liable. The DOJ antitrust section has the tools to detect legal agreement no matter the tech. This framework is flexible to adjust emerging risk. Algorithm appears to just ensure the word guiding body. Is it okay for Bob to do it? It is okay for algorithm. Okay, cool.
Before you start process, I'm on like a lot of email chains, but I'm not on the right one.
What's your email?
So you can send to rundebate@gmail.com.
Debate at Gmail. Okay. Okay, it should have run debate at Gmail on it now. Okay.
Okay, are you good?
Actually, while I ask, if someone doing a vocal recording, just get an announcement beforehand, maybe remember this,
Oh, I
just in
forgot.
case.
Oh,
So someone wants to set that up, so just if it goes out for Lincoln, that there's a local
Yeah.
copy you can
Yeah,
send
I
him.
can do that.
does the live stream, can you go back in it?
The live stream probably wouldn't be the best option. I think a local recording would be.
Okay, I think
Sorry, I should have asked that before.
Yeah, I can.
Sarah's gonna
Yeah,
handle
I'll
it.
check that right now.
Yeah, this
Just give
issue
me a
had
second.
last night.
It's not tonight yet.
So I don't really know why we have the recorder.
Are we good, Sarah?
Yeah, we're good.
Oh, shoot.
Okay, what anti-competitive industries are driving inflation?
There's a variety of one. I mean, Sarah isn't really getting specific ones. I mean, like, obviously, we're seeing, like, big tech, like, raise prices. Beef companies are raising prices. A lot of
That's
companies
not
are
an
large.
industry.
We're talking about the renewable industries.
Yeah,
So
renewables
then-
are bad.
Okay, so cars and gasoline are driving 60% of inflation. What is the plan to do to resolve those?
We remove tacit collusion because the price of a barrel of oil right now is like $95, but somehow it's like $4 a gallon, which is
No, like, I'm aware of the gas crisis. My question is, what kind of tacit collusion is happening in the car industry that's driving 58% of
So-
inflation?
tacit collusion is just like kind of the concept when like companies raise, like one company, like per se, I guess like Ford raises the price, and another company like Chevy would also raise the price because they see Ford
No,
raising the price.
again, I know what tacit collusion is and I know what inflation is. My question is, what instance of that is happening in the car industry? What evidence do you have that speaks to any industry besides energy?
So we talked about energy. We've also talked about like agriculture. We've talked about like tech, and then like
But do you
also
have any piece of evidence talking about the three most massive contributors to inflation?
I
We have
mean,
like general cards talking to like the whole industry creating inflation, specifically our
Can you
Stoller,
explain to me?
our Stoller 1229 cards, since you're asking for a specific one.
Yeah, fair. Why would price increases in a section of the economy drive sort of simultaneous price increases throughout the economy?
Our argument is that the price increases are throughout the economy right now.
Why does a single industry's increase in price spill over to other industries?
It's not just a single industry like increasing prices. It is multiple industries that are like increasing prices and then sub-industries that are also doing that.
Okay, how can tacit collusion explain inflation when corporate profit was at an all-time high in the last few decades, and we still were able to maintain inflation below the Federal Reserve's like 2% rate?
We're saying that tacit collusion is the reason that is like, so tacit collusion is the reason, like profit motive is the reason tacit collusion is happening, and the companies are using pandemic as an excuse to do this
But
tacit
then
collusion.
why, prior to the pandemic, when tacit collusion was occurring, right? We had
No,
all these
we're saying that
corporate-
tacit collusion was not occurring prior to the pandemic at the rate it is now.
So prior to the year 2020, tacit collusion was not occurring in corporations.
No, I said at the rate it is now. It is increased because
What is
the
like,
corporations are using COVID-19 as an excuse to have tacit
an
collusion.
excuse to who? Like, I don't understand.
So
it's
What-
an
what has
excuse to
changed because of the
consumers.
pandemic
Like an
that has-
excuse to consumers and government. So like, oh, the pandemic is making things cost more, so we're gonna raise our prices.
So they're just like more effectively fooling consumers, but like, what's the differential between the tacit collusion that was causing these massive profits for decades for corporations in America, then suddenly there's this like weird shady
Our
stuff happening
evidence-
during the pandemic, and now inflation is sort of.
I mean, like, I don't understand because during COVID, like, profits are increasing.
Do you all wanna mute your volume, so it's not echo?
Yeah, mine's
You're gonna.
Oh, and you on Zoom too, so it doesn't echo. No, you're good.
You should be good now.
Okay, everyone on my Zoom. Okay, the one and C was sent, it's 6, DOJ advantage, inflation advantage.
Just a sec, my, like, the visitor Wi-Fi just went out for me.
Okay, yeah, I thought it was like weird things.
Let me switch
Yeah.
Wi-Fi.
Can you up?
You could just take these. Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Let me just switch to the hotel desk real quick.
What's the order on here today?
It's, DOJ advantage, inflation advantage.
I'm so good at that.
Okay, my Wi-Fi just started working. Let me, give me a second.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Okay, I think it's good. Perfect. And close out these Zooms. Okay, everyone, you all are good, okay. Great. First on topicality, prohibitions are distinct from remedies, only what the independent elements of a practice rather than the practice itself should in all except in the case of prohibition, penalty for independent problems of also prohibition of merger by the pro-competitive independent profits are negated by the prohibition. The difference between remedies and prohibition that remedies come to an independent independent elements of merger, the first rank of local pro-competitive elements, prohibition of merger, punishments and business practices are ongoing conduct defined by the behaviors of many market participants. Macintosh 97 rules codified by business practices determines prices for price and merger for time scales for participants. The transaction rather than the transaction in question. Violation of claim only increases behavioral remedies that target anti-competitive aspects of the practice. All blasphemous increase prohibitions on the practice themselves. Vote negative for limiting ground infinite behavioral remedies and no uniqueness for offense, sex, TWC, TCWS. The scope of antitrust law defines schools attempt to meet current goals by banning practices or implementation questions. ECS, the no-take competition research consists of two broad areas for implementation and second scope research on desirability to consideration competition policies to power or awarding implementation coverage, allocation of competition laws, receiving goals of competition policy scope, average question by policy to receiving by competition law, shooting, delegating other fields to competition law, use for type privacy, info, employer, environmental effects, and competition law use more than competition. That means the act must change the consumer welfare standard record and 21 year license feature like the consumer welfare standard, addressing a wide range of goals through interest policy party and consumer welfare training of military storm, consumers willingness to sacrifice consumer welfare to characteristic, vote negative for limiting ground, only change goals, creates key economy and legal decides over what antitrust should consider the act. Topic raises to tiny exemptions and technical changes with no foreground. Next, the advantage counterpart in the United States federal government should close the prison at Guantanamo Bay, pass the voting rights act, ban jury internet, and the filibuster, and increases investigation and prosecution of white collar crime, including accounting fraud, insider trading, and corporate disclosure cases, increase in investigation and prosecution of hate crimes and civil rights violations, and adopt clear, non-partisan interpretations of immigration law. Like, one source democracy has an 18 years such a China, such a flood democracy pass. The UPR prohibit the racist murder ideals many that say on an anti-Russia, reverse on the right to vote, excellency, alleged federal law, holiday, injury, winners, and democratic regard to secure a partisan advantage, and the laws are supposed to be accepted. It has become the norm since introduced from moments of other constitutional court in the West. Teach also let the president Congress and see a human from Supreme Court only the heels rules over limited period of time. President New Chair complete request. All the movement say granting NDT Puerto Rico there is small argument for seeing no taxation or representation claim to Sol DOJ cred their one is the author code and 21 guards for the missionaries and my law crime enforcement perspective to administrations of immigration policy time for the civil rights the highest priority of Garland will be to restore trust. DOJ will be cutting cred in such schemes in court schools to issue enforcement priorities. Garland will be South States not fully investigating prosecuting case crimes and other civil rights matters. One winners for DOJ credibly to reverse damage for including immigration cases brand clear advice determination make count sense in immigration law rather than using AG powers to one immigration courses. So next, the capitalism causes environmental extinction, depletion, and waste crisis. Outpaces psychological abuse. 21 there is an existential crisis. 7 crisis comes into segregation, ozone depletion, nitrogen, and phosphorus cycle, global vegetable use, whatever years old, chemical pollution, there's no technical fish, not a feral sea leaf, may increase units produce overall production per unit counts, the cost per species rate, the depletes resources, must correspond to the rate at which the production rates, waste must be aligned with the rate when the forms of chemicals are released, either as that creating the metabolic rate making as much fast as possible is tended with the temporality of our environmental resource depleted, waste and rate products to contribute to capitalism, environmental benefit tends to be overruled by grower die imperative, antitrust is capitalist competition and inevitably replicates market collapsible. 1990s beginning of the competition practical duties of voice and the case of the petty conflict, which is the national we covered this is a problem capitalism, but the monopoly argument goes, we don't have to think about services just little detail capital rising from day one years like these over again repeated all these punishment as major policy both costs we allow to undercredit considers one of the causes of the competition with access to other parts of the world. The social cost of automation was documented over and over again. Capitalism goes through phases. We should promote one in favor of the other capitalism race, but only company A, company B, company B classes, company A, so standards workers should have reaching when you're responsible for over rental doing coming down one. They're the whole point fighting against small business models as long as use capitalism as reproduce reversion into and bites the number to public get rid of them and reestablish competition. Capitalism problem getting out is a solution. Vote negative to endorse global movements, pressure towards social state actions are building forces the hands of monopolies winner in all 15 seconds to real focus on policy applications, orientation, focus, services, and model changes. Their size, reducing class analysis, predicting no research, and policy by putting orientation for that and bottom-up engagement, social movement, 39%, completely alienating from policy stables. A bottom-up researchers would be asking for public health research with labor unions, research is maximum about Latin America and Arab free to industry movements in EU, provide opportunities to address grassroots stakeholders to develop bottom-up perspective policy change. Health policy changes our team cannot co-set ourselves on that veil of neutrality to orientation of serving policymakers. Next is the politics decide China's competition bills that are not semiconductors passes through fragile bipartisan consensus now. Biden pushes Team Washington 318 up here. Rare point bipartisan consensus in Washington starts from more than 50 billion to bolster U.S. chip production absolutely issues threat to solve progress and percentage of manufacturing also put U.S. high risk of supply chain disruption that will allow the U.S. to be China critical tech like semiconductors to provide agreement on these for states support domestic chip production warriors and even hopeful by the city and support for gamers to develop and put available medicine next as soon as possible. Plan during PC and trees all present and to make bipartisan workers potential policies that would divide the Congress and nations will survive limited challenges. How Biden will make commitments to make competition law major commitment will have to trigger the other goals but I'm sure competition rules to shoot by the budget priorities. This requires leaders to invest PC statement will be no recommended competition policy that involve Chinese tech edge cause extinction from nuclear war emerging tech chain 19 AI 3 predicted that against reader of the technology the IoT 5G space cyber homeless benefits for cancerous autonomous creators resulting in extinction through created by rogue states for WD spring arms for the first GE by outclassing people directed energy may undermine global stability credits for conference on opportunities winning the tech race and trying to master technology before the Democrat war. This could lead to repetition of the balance of power outstanding global stability. Next is the DOJ. This now they're making moves towards the Random House suit open markets limit by major move major events in the Defense Department suit to block Random House acquisition policy orders and acquisition interest policy the action amount to major when resources are finite. The plan trades off less and 21 challenges for you. We can piggy banks on the resource available by very stress back is only significant prosecutorial time in the for devoted resulting these factors will be full of investigations will lead to reduce prosecutorial bandwidth through advancing enforcement priorities. Various competing demands led to a national prioritization of certain enforcement over others. It's key to challenge monopoly power coding, putting on by challenging Random House DOJ, so which single vital continue to support and some sellers and council DOJ to Kumar. Important element of CPD more carefully could be informed also to put the money where their mouth is. That's key to solve inequality, foster 21 good, so that inequalities versus race and one cause labor workers are competitive employers use workers suppress wages, but suppress enhance inequality creates a wedge reduces income and increases economic growth, results in employment, depresses capital, qualifies workers and find jobs, workers invest in school and exit and rely on government cost taxes, expenses from not reduce labor tax, 20% labor concentration increase when not see employees who wage down people refuse. Hence, the need for interdisciplinary labor market power inequality drives to versatile nationalism makes more levels and eliminate nationalism spheres and equality states. And getting more nationalism with angry inequality increase domestic inequalities are more important stimulus for nationalism and nuclear open service private defense states. Before national spread said, does mean that with inequality labor hustling different resolutions will group up where national national president fund, the result of military foreign posture and MR is ritual, capacity, economic consolidation, lead to international conflict, rising inequality, making more dangerous world, DOJ advantage, GPT's statistical artifacts, and 18 results are presented across the sectors of the pretty much the countries and practice zero growth, so that public measure growth, there's for responsibilities based on the emergency design and countries on our past US, from the very democracy, million nations, Eastern democracies, and all that achievement, EU and US breakdown, found from 21, European thinking was broken, prepared by the health decline, and surgery race questions, the trouble with the party, race questions about long-term tragedies, and reliable, vital, follow allies are looking for COVID rights, brutality, civil rights, European China, global China, American, global China, Russia, new leader, and Iran, who makes Fox and Devil Blation and Green 21 Army and Capital images of which neither the Pope nor allies could shake your office picture, could find ally leaders. So questions from Washington reliably monitor means over all the capital reinforce in kind of allies who treat on the treaties will finish good and other things automatically to be elected Trump. Allies know risk crisis and crisis ultimately rest crisis globally so good. In 19 citizens of the streets rejecting Mouse Ukraine's economies have progress social arrest for routines will keep with their oppression political polarization media institutions against Democracy schools events for equal access to prosperity Democracy only system perceived is capable of delivering it the in or it's resilient the inflation advantage their link is backward inflationary pressures are emerging from highly competitive markets in 2022 inflation hit high officials have claimed they will monopolize allegation without better evidence specific causal inflation represents came with crack down on large companies resulting in higher prices economists skeptical the antitrust lower prices president's desire to use antitrust enforcement versus rigid with very highly competitive markets specifically energy gasoline one of the most competitive interests simply use it to lower prices for consumers in the United States to address supply side issues number 2 concentration hinting antitrust have inverse effect no causation between concentration and inflation panel 119 economists have this monopolization and explanation for inflation general defined as a general increase general the operative where things like antitrust enforcement companies control the price of beef is risen that will explain when the price of meat is increasing or we're expecting general increase in the price level increase in price level takes a system of monopoly none of these sectors is able to explain the general increase in price level having the same time for the 50% why every sector decided to start using its monopoly spread making power roughly the same time supply constraints are separate concerns for antitrust and there's no inflation will decline through 3.4 high inflation will be temporary for non-infant and she's only 4 years ago inflation was interesting the economy back then everyone expected inflation long-term expectation remain anchored a lot of inflation will subside when oil and food price austerity those in turn going to die warnings and return of 70 stagflation should look at the history inflation inflation of 22 looks different and much easier to solve and renewables don't solve warming for 21 big businesses wasted world corporations like Capital Switch Power Vision that'll be prices being mobilized against the planet dome energy sources like oil have because only one as available the new source and as fibers and absolute terms petroleum and the deforestation petroleum not the oil but phosphorus intensification of oiling system even more much more efficient renewable energy consumption increase overall consumption has increased far more and efficiency encourages use to run wide savings demonstrate documented over and over again improvements in corresponding to decline overall environmental impact of moving core industry and rising consumption and carbon dioxide individual economies reduce dependency generally done so by outsourcing dirty industries but analysis would know decoupling exists EVs under capitalism and tech proposal rather than decoupling companies from new markets and open and fresh one high tech vehicles foster rates for rare materials in Texas and we don't have enough social system that allows it it's crucial to build independent movements that prioritizes these over logistics and grid collapses and possible scene entry 16 even localized networks are renewable experts say the American power grid is far too complex to shut down on its own for tax take lights out they need to gain a lot of access to more points nobody's looking said cyber attack knowledgeable director cyber security company we don't think it's possible no blackouts fourth and 18 cyber attacks are likely the grid doesn't work that way infrastructure for full dependencies and regional variations right yeah redundancies and regional variations
Status of the off,
conditional the status quo is always a logical option
status of the planks.
conditional
Okay, sweet. What movements do you endorse?
we endorse movements that are like fighting for things like public housing and examples like Christiana in Copenhagen, like things that have happened,
So,
like AMA in Chile is
It's like
an
a
example of a sort of movement that resulted in a governmental change towards.
okay,
social
so
policy.
I guess like why does antitrust prevent movements from organizing?
Because we've read evidence that antitrust is capitalist and the app reinforces capital domination that prevents effective movements. And we'll obviously make
Okay.
several more specific legal arguments.
My next question is your evidence talks a lot about the Arab Spring being an example of activism. Like, wouldn't that cause transition wars if movements are able to like
We don't think
effectually
that
change?
we don't think that movements are going to cause transition wars. Maybe be a bit more specific as to like who you think the US is going to go to war with.
I mean, like, the Arab Spring didn't cause wars or like transition wars.
What transition wars do you think it caused on a large scale?
The Syrian Civil War,
Why
the
was
Yemeni War.
How is the Arab Spring entirely responsible for the Yemeni War or the
Okay.
Syria War?
I don't think this is getting.
You also should read
No,
evidence.
actually-
You should read evidence about those things in the 2AC. It's
No,
like, hard to be like, oh, this example, this caused a war, no evidence is read substantiating that.
Okay.
It's also like ridiculous to establish that that is like the primary factors aid was getting out for the
Okay.
conflicts.
And then clarify, is it global movements or just like domestic movements?
The alternative endorses global movements. It's,
Okay, sweet.
yeah.
My next question is on the DOJ. How does breaking up a book company solve inequality, or I guess just reduce monopoly power worldwide?
The Koenig evidence indicates that the DOJ is making its claim in the Random House suit based on labor grounds. And so if the court establishes that like labor is a viable a viable grounds for this sort of suit to occur, then it opens the floodgates for these other suits that like our evidence thinks is going to be important for like allowing workers to break out of cycles of poverty, things like that.
Yep.
It's like the grounds that the DOJ is arguing the suit on is something that's super important for labor and inequality.
I guess like if the DOJ already has like not enough resources to focus on multiple cases, how are they going to break up like monopolies like
Because our open markets evidence indicates that the DOJ is focused on this sort of like approach, and they're focused on this case, which our evidence like it doesn't have to be the DOJ arguing future cases that result in
So-
race inequality, but we have read evidence that their resources are finite, and we read evidence that they're focusing on this now. The
So
plan is what trades off, not the
breaking up the book company solves inequality.
I explained why before.
Okay,
I
yep.
think that.
Next question on the Washington evidence. I mean,
Sorry, what flow is this on?
politics. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So anti-China is like popular. I mean, it already passed the Senate. Do you like? I guess like what specifically about the plan is bad that causes it?
The Karstensen evidence indicates, well, first of all, it didn't like pass super easily, like there are differences to be resolved. And then we read evidence that the plan is unpopular and trades off in terms of PC and time to resolve like the differences between the House and the Senate.
Yeah, starting from now.
Wait,
Okay, yeah, stop.
7.
Can you give me that stand, please?
Yeah, sure. Number to unmute and whatnot.
Oh, yeah, sorry. So Tracy's stuff, but I'll wait to give an order once they come back.
Okay.
That's great.
Well, it's like March, this is for you.
Oh, okay, wait, Lincoln. Lincoln, you good? Okay. Everyone good for an order?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so it's gonna be T breakup, T CWS, the cap K, DOJ counterplan, or sorry, the DOJ DA, then the DOJ counterplan, and then the keys QA, and then DOJ advantage, inflation advantage.
Start chart real quickly again. Stop right, 656.
Okay,
So I need that again.
yeah,
Name.
okay, so case first, the DOJ advantage, and then inflation. And then T breakup, TCWS. And then the cap K, DOJ counterplan, DOJ DA, and then the politics DA.
Sorry, my Wi-Fi's failing me, but I'm gonna try and find a way to.
Okay, yeah, just let me.
The elections on here, you just said, okay.
Oh yeah, I'm good to go.
Everyone good?
We get Lincoln, yes.
Just a sec. Lincoln, you good? Lincoln?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, yay.
Is Lincoln frozen for y'all? Okay, wait, no, Lincoln's unfrozen.
You sure?
Lincoln, you good? Okay.
You sure?
Yes.
Okay.
Alright.
You was there. They know.
I was there.
I'm paranoid now. So
It was
you
bad.
sure?
It was bad.
Okay.
I think I wanted
Sorry, I got my phone wrong order. Can you give me your DOJ advantage? Okay, never mind, okay.
Who use they as an individual pronoun? Is it they was or they were?
I always say they were. Democratic declines first Chinese adventurism into the CWS and no specific abilities that causes war strong democracy creates liberal context and softball war that's time. Democratic peace theory is true. Democratic peace theory is extremely robust empirical supported the ideas smoking causes cancer and low 21 promises in democratic states and not how state wars is one of the most enduring ideas of democratic relationships. Democratic peace is the closest thing we have to empirical studies in international relations given to Johnson democratic peace human alliance such as capitalism context intensive economies competitive associations laws of zero light and periodic regression. This virtual verse on assumptions we oppose the alternative approach based on the non-periodic causation and correlation suggested non-proactive sensitivity analysis conformity is they robust empirical evidence for democratic peace our analysis applies a method originally developed by cognitive theory because of the between smoking and timber as most equal to care release dispute the democratic peace our application yields a strength confounder must be 47 times more prevalent in democratic diets and other kinds of diets the potential for confounder to explain the democratic peace would at least 5 times the prevalence of mutilated confounders for smoking a long time with positive association between democracy and is more robust than smoking and lung cancer and no EU and US breakdown in this card that proves that democracy is still key and collapse is not inevitable. COVID proves and on inflation robust greatest key to prevent extinction. Certain is the collapse all technical production 2% of the world keeps 98% but efficient tech is key. That's why robust greatest key to prevent extinction. Sustained outrage is it collapses all technical production 2% of the world keeps the other 98 but tech is key.
and populist and short-term group business policies explore executive risk, market direct expertise, making solving existential crises out of control, AI, bioterritorial, astros, super volcanoes, and possible, and by multi-key to rebuild alliances to help transnational challenges like cruel trade and COVID, and warming causes nuclear, exhaustive empirical studies prove as a conflict multiplier, food, water insecurity, and save the system that destroys nuclear war, and no politics are not using this as a scapegoat. Rather, companies are using companies are using inflation as companies are using COVID as a scapegoat in order to create tacit collusion. And yes, we increase renewables because the problem with renewables now is that they're available, but the prices are too high because of inflation. The only way to solve and collapses not impossible. We've shown that in the grid answering because Texas proves that grid is not sustainable on cheaper now. When we mean anti-competitive, not have to be ongoing anti-competitive business practices or actions that harm the competitive process, anti-competitive or first actions that harm the competitive process. We conclude the no way to find the anti-competitive business practices. To prohibition concludes the rule of reason and purpose arbitrary. Skip this part. Antitrust is a process there and complete with regulation, creating 11 regulation and antitrust. Achieve this goal in different ways. Regulators choose to use them directly through rules. Antitrust sees them indirectly by a process and bring them out after break up the oversimplifies antitrust and artificially inflates pace. No often there's anti practices on ban. You can show no hand regulated industries, functional checks like biodiversity, such reasonability, good enough competing interpretation causes a substance trend. That T said WS. One we mean extends to the possible increase the extent of area Mr. 21, increase to extend enlarge of so these loss spreads versus 14 scope of law refers to only how broadly the provision applies. The private sector includes subsets of JSC 19, private sector umbrella term to play any non-public business, where just those are Sherman claimed in FPCs of form modifications FPC, Sherman FPC including with some reasonability to the core and just but no less. 3 after unforeseen has to change to CWS means you don't have the ability to innovate the power levels and decimate the opposite topic area and against us becoming stick dead and for arbitrary zero evidence is the only scope with CWS their evidence is according to the consideration and it's concern not scope by functional limits all states counterfeits and it just makes prohibition things regulated per hour and capping is an ground 6 no groundless sector are still linked to generics because they use the same legal justification they have still have to extend the scope and 7 reasonability if it's good enough competing interpretation causes the credit race to the bottom on the okay. From reporting the apathy to apathy skills together is the only incentive for stasis that's key to class 1 their opponents only good skills to make the world better towards their price. Epistemology is the secondary their framework crosses endless studies and causes material improvements day-to-day purpose. 2000 epistemology will debate max and the elitism displays the contempt for those who struggle with the other have to do deeper us how does it help solve war? How does those speak to the complement and those support the problem solving the bad positions aggregates the helpful solving realities and the need from business to debate towards epistemology to be helpful and perm people double by neither the perm could ever come the links or cancel and the rest of capitalism and yes sustainable for reducing increasing efficiency, decreasing growth, daily 14. Comes about growing and more value from the support. We do not consume more. Example of land uses critical land use for ag use not coming to an end. The city should global things that some good uses of slow growth and meaning the big reversal is occurring by individuals. Activity can create a better productivity problem. Country feels taller, property rates and higher ideals and tech development is open source activities to lower dysfunctional man's human people not overwhelmed. The history for force and pieces of destruction of past. The use of forces expanding because people are engineering increase productivity. Points of shortage have been second for decades. I'm not injured. Humanity lives in additions and efficiency, market productions, and there's better population population go there any peak by the time they'll fall 10th century economic freedom, produce prosperity, which reduces children and the appeals for transition worth class and 16 failure to deliver would create a crisis image. Immigrants in the environment we target to lead us remain to the damage over the growth. Degrowth is guaranteed for a minor penal protection or equality. Degrowth is nothing to say about what mechanism to prevent the states. Would prevent states from taking military advantage of other countries and capsules climate market scope necessary for greenhouse gas reduction. Whole is Dallas 21 worth in ESG. Issues and investment capitals believe in money at the end. There was no room in the states considered the growth healthy and thinkable that growth would be extended. The tendencies of capitalism versus the DRL development of a challenging agenda but one principle for useful for and reduce capital technologies within the capitalism and industry collapse turns the environment abandoned both cause methane links onto the DOJ counterplan. From people to the counterplan links their evidence about finite resources. DOJ I can do all so one thing will fill an antitrust bureau solve they compartmentalized. They can do all of it. And the 1AC says taxes and collusion and key. They have to resolve that default to the firm. And conditionality is voter. Multiple use to the 2AC target strategy can't justify a world in action of the world and state kind takes with inevitable tactical errors and strategy vehicles. Advocacy skills, one is a good definition and exercising throwing different children that are not going to give better directions between them. So for education and various disposals solves of their offense on the DOJ VA. Practice of PMC, by inflation, pushing the individual sector price coding, oil and security processing, but it's the same. But it's the same push is key to solve that. A new DOJ initiative thumbs every part of the act except for the part that was worked in and announced in February despite ramping up the stage destroying and exploiting the pandemic to raise prices. That's how the person price fixing the enforcement is sign out the source calls the supreme evil. The first priority of agencies expertise in sprawling cruelty. Raising virtual and that proves Perlin that's Perlin. And they conceded all of the numbers coming out of the 1AC means that they conceded that any of their DAs are totally thumped by the entirety of the 1AC. They can't go for any of these DAs in the block. And Major Smith and now Dollar 227 DOJ experts of the supply chain delivery structuring warehousing the real the efforts of efficient process just as not targeting the widest swath of companies. The initiative runs the scope of the Biden security and the competitive behavior. Any company in the supply chain should be a process in the global and global craft thumbs. And no voter suppression, extortion, abortion, to NCTR thumb, overload now because of permissible antitrust real enforcement turns to the antitrust process, slaughter 20, jurisprudence of permissive incentivized anti-competitive conduct where for many cases against it should never have been gone under the boardroom incentive for many by enforcement dollars on merchants that are clearly illegal. These merchants break down the all day, turn effective results of the $10 reverse. Normal means solve something is more antitrust, a part of doing more antitrust conduct revenues overwhelming forces now structural remedy solve the way team. Enforcers rely heavily on constant degrees. Their management may be overwhelming the level of protected oversight is severe to monitor every constant degree. We give the believers of structural remedy self that's continuing on a much clearer and no trade-off and no impact. The FTC fills in and private enforcement solves onto the PCA. Putin's apple thumbs was a 318. There's a lot going on in Washington by climate change overshadowing all of it. The common and the shice and the hopping Biden he deals with the domestic difficulties that causes troubling distraction, undermining its effectiveness to return home and will pass by not case at top of the docket. Meyer 323. Congress itself and the board not its computerity. Bureau's job in May is a timeline is impossible. It's unclear that they will come together. The town knows how to keep at least sensitive. Republicans in the White House to go higher in the midterms and approach the Republicans to get set up a compromise. Also for the financial sector, drop it again. The trade university to first review of the alternative Senate Republicans. Inflation gives Biden a political cover and inflation gives Biden a cover for the plan in the ag thumbs and autoplayed it and. PC fails as a fairy tale. Taylor 22. Persuasion power exactly 0 in the policy produced given how little Congress has passed. Okay, that part of passed.
Okay, are you good for questions?
Yeah.
Oh wait, actually, you didn't send the part of your left case. I don't think.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, something.
Let me get that for you. I'll just put it in the Tracy and send the Tracy again if that's what.
Yeah, she's all, you have it.
Okay, just a second.
Are you good for class X?
Yep.
I want to start on like Cap K, the Carlson evidence you read against the all. It's also tagged it fails in first transmission wars. I'm just like trying to find a warrant in the car. It's just like degrowth that has nothing to say about mechanisms that prevent states from taking military advantage in countries pursuing degrowth. First, where do you think this evidence indicates that other countries will attack the U.S.? Who's going to attack the U.S. if we adopt like more socialist
Okay,
policies? And
so
also, why does why does the alternative mean that we can't defend ourselves?
Okay, so what it's saying is that, first of all, the governments are going to make sure that these transitions fails both in the United States and foreign governments. If you ask for specific governments that will make sure it fails, it's every democratic government.
Where do you think your evidence says every democratic government is going to attack the U.S. if we decide to offer like public housing?
I mean, we're saying that a revolution, which is what is the advocacy of the alternative, will create intervention from foreign companies because they're scared it's another Cold War of communism. It doesn't matter what you actually do; it's the perception of what you do that creates a government.
My last question about that is, where do you think your evidence says that?
I mean, like, I guess we're saying that government intervention will happen. You're asking me for explanation.
Okay, I'm just gonna move on because your evidence just doesn't say that. A different question about the renewables debate. So I understand that like on the inflation advantage, you've read evidence if like renewables are cheap or like going to become cheap, sure. Where have you read evidence that renewables solve? Like none of this evidence is like it might, like there's one line that's like it could lead to a rapid reduction in fossil fuels, but it's very hypothetical and it doesn't say that it's sufficient to solve climate change.
I think are you asking for prospects of like the 1AC and where we see like renewable solve warming?
I mean,
Because
you can answer it with whatever you want to answer it with, but I'm just like, where have you presented evidence that like renewables are going to solve climate change? Because I understand that you're going to make that.
I mean, like that's the entirety of our Wood 21 card.
Are you talking about in the 1AC?
Yeah.
Like at the same time, like yeah, it's has like it's just talking about how it's become cheaper and it has lines about how it can combat climate change. But what's the warrant that we have to respond to? Like why is that true?
I mean, like seriously, the warrant for why it solves climate change is because it creates less CO2 in the environment. If it's cheaper, it'll be able to use. The only reason we're not using renewables right now is because fossil fuels are cheaper. Once we have renewables at a price which we can afford, then the country will use.
Okay, sure. I have a different question on topicality. The first violation, to be clear, you don't break up the companies that engage in price gouging.
What topic? The T breakup.
The T breakup, yeah.
Yeah.
So you don't. Or you do break them up.
Yeah, we do break them up.
Okay. And then the second violation, to be clear, you expand the scope of the consumer welfare standard to cover tacit collusion.
Yeah, we expand the scope of like the consumer welfare, like all antitrust laws now.
Are you expect whether you able to connect to the lesson? I think I'm connected to it, yeah. It's not someone. Yeah, but it's just not. Do you want to send it? Or you can send it to me? Yeah, I can't send it yet.
Whoa.
Yeah, my husband doesn't have either, but.
Is it Catholic open?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you go out to the view.
It's returned.
Sounds familiar, over at all.
Oh, it's just like this. Okay. Now I'm gonna send it to you. Yeah, okay, it works.
You would think there would be block.
I'll just leave it to you.
That was a reasonable question.
I also have to read it. Okay, yeah. Just make sure your laptop's muted, so the sound.
Yep, just muted, okay.
Okay, the truancy sent. I'm just getting into this one. Okay, truancy sent, Lincoln. If the order is gonna be. Okay, murder will be TCWS, then the advantage plan, politics DA, DOJ DA, and then the inflation advantage. Yeah, it's T, then the DOJ counter plan, the politics DA, the DOJ, and then the inflation advantage. Okay.
defined what antitrust law should be dedicated to protect the scope is currently defined by the Consumer Welfare Center. That means the implement must change the legal standard of consideration so that competition law now has a different policy objective of inequality and environmental effects, privacy protection, for example. But the plan instead enforces current competition law under the Consumer Welfare Standard, which is not a question of scope, but rather one of implementation. Only our evidence has intent to define and exclude theirs with a direct comparison between the two firms. Now, scope 1, 2AC Parsons' evidence is a quote from a vice chancellor explaining why he believes the provision should apply and isn't in the context of antitrust 2. Scope means goals and values such as a Rachi 18 Act policy law competition answers questions to the normative scope of competition enforcement. The question is a competition problem this becomes uncommon in this paper 6 to outline the scope of competition law, its goals and values. 3, the plan also violates the word core that's similar in Act 21. The Supreme Court emphasized consumer welfare as the core antitrust policy law. A growing number of laws conclude consumer welfare is inadequate, and scholars report over into objectives and concerns have resulted in studies and the legislation that endorses the defense of consumer welfare ban. CW is likely to do harm broadening the scope of all constitutional violation would create uncertainty to assign the case of fairness of labor, would create a confusion not consistent with the rule of law. 4, CWS is a consistent goal that stores 20 antitrust law benefits from the long-standing support for the consumer welfare standard. The Supreme Court has consistently acknowledged consumer welfare goals and consumer welfare serves as a common language. 5, courts and agencies agree that Supreme Court 20, the Chicago Brigade, broad acceptance courts and antitrust support for injustice in the Supreme Court adopted consumer welfare standard continues to govern antitrust and antitrust law as advocate or rejection or counter revolution against the consumer welfare. 6, that means the act must change or replace the consumer welfare standard that's trying to maintain and improve. Well, Holbrook was laws and access have been called to abandon the condition that antitrust should focus on the consumer harms and benefits by center on the scope of addressing social challenges and today's neoliberalization. Advocates extending the scope of antitrust to address small business inequality regional to climate stagnation policy about privacy and politics. Now, we don't disagree on the definitions of private sector and core antitrust laws. We disagree in the context of core and the context of scope. None of the other ones. They're answering T subsets, not TWS, which is not the argument that we're making. Now, affirmative ground 1, no link. The advocates are explicit that Supreme Court 20 populist critiques have explicitly called for antitrust to end its alliance with the CWS and Slim testified before the Senate and argued that courts should formally abandon the CWS. Will argue that antitrust controls cannot be recovered without genocidating the consumer welfare. There are numerous LT advocates. They are all writing now that Story 20 at this time. In publication, numerous scholars, politicians, and commentators advocating for antitrust law to return to the revolution for immigrating contraction and leaves. 1 national political party has included the already advanced sentiments and legislators to include introduce legislation. 2, database of antitrust literature from 2000 to the present shows its app leaning that's got in more than 19 the experiment focusing on enforcing antitrust laws a little bit. Run over 40 years in scholars in position to assess the evidence and database of most recent literature on antitrust enforcement. The book future they the best finds evidence to make it involved under enforcement of antitrust law over law. Overall, the picture of the divergence between judicial thinking on one hand, rigorous economics on the other. 3, limits outweigh in turn topic education without class, health, recruits, horizontal innovation solves. It's not arbitrary, only our evidence defines scope and has intent to exclude their warrants. Again, we're about T subsets, not TCWS. No functional limits, and yes, ground last one, there's no negative ground or link uniqueness without our interpretation. All negative wins on a diss out on this topic can be attributed to link evidence that specifically discuss a complete replacement of the consumer welfare standard and shitty affirmative no link debating. 2, only accessible literature base that's Phillips 18, the consumer welfare made headlines, which is not always the true in the antitrust. We have a great deal of op-ed television and so forth regarding the consumer welfare. This is an important time. 3, it strikes a middle ground that's as Rachi 18 consider current debate in the U.S. as needed to generally obtain the mentor of antitrust assessment. The debate stems from the narrow scope and the notices which are given for wedding and initiative consumer welfare. The decline of it is in much with rate of proposals from moderate to condemnation of bigness and numerous counter arguments and on the U.S. Debate on the Embrigation, C. Shapiro, Kahn, Crane, Shalonsky, and Hovenkamp reasonability. They're not that was a limiting ground offense. Any one area articulation demands arbitrary judgment granted to go up what you personally think should be topical or is okay. Green lights out around abuse and doesn't solve or limits argument. It's also the only accessible and educational version of the topic, which proves that reasonability isn't true in this instance. That's Phillips 18. Our topic is a CWS and most folks in the public know that this is standard use across the board. The judge I took that conduct and is used by around the world. It happened harm to consumers in discussion how now whether the standard right. Some argue that the CWS has failed in hearings address the assumption that underlying these claims and panels explore how the CWS and conservative alternatives does the CWS fail and how understand alternatives and how they would apply different standard is a fascinating and important topic. Now the advantage counterplan can see the permanent surface has a competition. The solvency deficits on this flow should zero the democracy DOJ advantage. If closing Guantanamo, banning gerrymandering, ending the filibuster, and ensuring mass votes rights doesn't strengthen our democracy in a miniature battle against corporate America will either. Their own evidence concedes that much more action is necessary, such as prosecuting hate crimes, civil rights investigations, insider trading, and fraud broadly, which is something they don't talk. The capital link evidence and the one in all will prove how this solvency argument is offense because their attempt to fix democracy within a capital structure recreates their impact conditionality is good. 1, logic, the only goal of the negatives is just for the one I see is proving the counterplan doesn't prove the plan is a good idea. 2, negative flags, true and fairness is 2, easy being out, side buys, fake plans, 0 1 for case explanation means they can leverage 20 interlinks on any flow, which proves that 2AC skew is good. 3, linked to education, policymakers must defend their arguments from the left and right, no impact to contradictions. 3, even if statements for non-voter one error made will be made impossible anything else trace off with substance if they when reasonability is applied here. Just the links to the relevance and does it solve teams out planks and force terms and 2 and 4 clarifies condo. Now the politics you can see there's no link and no impact. We're not going for it all. The uniqueness over one's argument also take out the DOJ dissent, which we're taking, not going for it. Go to the inflation flow. Inflation is the core internal link for their entire advantage and everyone of their impacts, and yet they have zero empirical support or explanation of how they solve these. We didn't read the scapegoating card in the 1 and C, but you dropped the other two cards that we did read. One, anti-trust and lower prices. Inflation is being driven by services and goods and highly competitive markets. Used cars, energy, gasoline, all are driving the 58% increase in inflation, but those markets are the most competitive ones. That's the long evidence. Inland markets are not engaging in tacit collusion, which means that they can't solve. That's Paul's 22 are corporate products that blame for inflation. No, what interest reduce inflation not by a significant amount. The items experiencing idiosyncratic price increases are not in all holistic markets, and corporate profits have been at near highs in the last decade. That inflation saw below 2%. Interest applications are limited, and that have experienced price increases. Energy, gasoline, and cars are not anti-competitive. 3. Only we have 2022 evidence on this. They only have one card from this year, and it's specifically in the context of why renewables prices are going up. It doesn't make a reverse causal claim for why the plan would then resolve that. The only causal evidence they have is the 1AC Stoller evidence, which is towards the bottom. It just says that CEOs admit that they're price gouging, not that prohibiting tacit collusion would then inversely solve inflation, which means that they just have descriptive claims but no causal claim for why the plan solves the case. Grid and populism impact will be linked in the one in our, but renewables fail. They've dropped 4 cap K cards on the case that turn the entirety of the advantage and proves that the cap K straight turns the case. 1, cheap renewable consumption increases unsustainable energy consumption. Business management of renewables secures increasing carbon dioxide and outsourcing of dirty industries. Our evidence uses a meta-analysis of 179 studies that specifically concluded from 1990 to 2019, all of the studies that have occurred in the context of warning and cheap renewable consumption have concluded that this is not an effective mechanism or something that a one-shot policy can solve. That's a spare evidence. 2, short-term focus on competitive advantage ensures no efficiency or innovation. That's Al's in 21. Advantage by capital seeking market control should favor renewables and the capital preferred stocks due to competitive accumulation. Coal like oil would be hoarded in enterprises. This allows individual units to compete more efficiently. Security authority from transport to heating and locked into the short-term imperative and possible capital will assume the privilege precision in an efficient way. 3, they don't increase renewables and they don't solve any of the impacts of the K. That pain in Stewart 21 sustainable future means socialist planning renewable will be down under capitalism. Even if there were, we would still face ecological catastrophes. Capitalism is exceeding the number of boundaries and species, and so degradation and deforestation and mandates and incursion are undermining their ability to ignore technology alone will solve it. Under capitalism is the opposite of the case. Efficient use rates further expansion and development results in a net increase in energy use, and social planning can ensure that the quality without environmental intensity. 4, green gases can solve warming. That's Mr. 921. The private sector green capitalism fears yet another gimmick to avoid reckoning with technology. Technology supposedly prevent the abyss, and it sounds too good to be true because it is capitalism DNA unfit to go with climate change. And the entire system is premised on the privatization of things. Socialism clauses to determination come from many corporations, even if managers were willing to pursue decarbonization, unless shareholders would resist and value maximization revenue to premium the value, and managers be able to see financial industry and $4 trillion into green labeled assets and turn out not to be green at all. 71% of ESG theme funds are negatively aligned with the goals of Paris 5. It can't reverse capitals of heavy metal use or nuclear waste that all causes extinction. That's out in 21. Fossil capital is one modality of the death of externalities and accumulation of heavy metal and nuclear waste extending far beyond the specific catastrophe of carbonized atmosphere. The 1R must read a card in the context of capitalism that says that any of these components solve because the 1AC evidence is just not hitting for them, and they don't have the card in the 2AC that speaks to the context of renewables in the context of the critique. The plan did not solve the grid. The 1AC Herbert evidence only card that talks about the grid. It's a study from researchers at Dartmouth that was done a few years ago, identifying that there are several changes that need to be made in order to the grid. And that would be a great solvency advocate for a counterplan, not an app that doesn't do any of those things. It specifically talks about how there's disruptions in the context of extreme weather protocol and how we're approaching different threats from different nations and non-state actors. They have no capacity to solve any of those things, and they have no reason why solving illicit conclusion somehow makes the grid stronger if it's already weak now, which proves that their uniqueness is backwards. And the grid, if not, is resilient. The 1AC CNN evidence is from 10 days ago and explains the complexity of the American power grid is far too complex to shut down completely. There's no populism internal link. It's about global inflation that is hidden in Europe, which existing political agitation is occurring across Poland and Germany, and populist parties that are already winning in France and Spain, which proves that neither of those things they solve because they have no capacity to solve global inflation in the context of the U.S. energy market.
Good for cross section.
Yeah, this mouse thing is.
Okay, so why does like not threatening antitrust solve tacit collusion when the examples of like threatening the meat and steel industry decrease the prices by 50%?
I obviously contest the idea that prices decrease by 50% in either of those industries. I don't think that's true. I have no idea. Like you said, it all happened post the pandemic. I really just think you're lying about that.
That what happened post
What piece of
pandemic?
evidence do you have that prices have decreased by 50% since 2020 in either of those industries?
It's not like since 2020. It was like when we saw tacit collusion in those areas. But like
Great,
moving
if
on.
all of that is true, then like inflation isn't the key internal link because the most competitive industries have seen lower rates of prices.
Okay, so then like antitrust solves, but so like in green assets, you say like green assets don't solve, but it doesn't say like renewables specifically. How does this prove any way that renewables fail?
All of these pieces of evidence are specifically in the context of how renewables won't even be used even when they're cheap, and that there's an artificial price increase that will occur inevitably, which proves that you don't solve.
Where does the artificial price increase come from?
The capitalists, all these corporations.
Okay, so
We
government
don't think
intervention,
antitrust,
tax
we don't think
inclusion can
antitrust
solve
is
that.
sufficient. We don't think antitrust is sufficient to do that. They'll find different ways. The two cards at the top specifically talk about why tacit collusion fails. It's an impossible rule to administer. There's no specific language. There's tons of avoidance and ambiguity that businesses can use, and there's other areas of law that they can pursue it on.
Okay, also, your last card on renewables failing is talking about how like nuclear waste is bad for the environment. How does promoting renewables create nuclear waste?
That's not what we're saying. We're just
Okay, so then why did you read, okay, sorry, you
when
can't.
you reverse either of those things, and those are independent internal links to warming.
Okay, so if we can't reverse either of those links, is it just descriptive of the status quo?
No,
and
so we
descriptive
have
of the
pieces of
negative?
evidence that talk about how different types of socialist innovation can engage in changes to deforestation that has already occurred.
Okay, so how do you get rid of nuclear waste under the like CAPK?
Okay, honestly, I'm unsure how we do get rid of nuclear waste in the context of the CAPK, but that's not really the argument. The argument is just that's already happening in the status quo. These impacts are inevitable. The only chance of resolving, I agree with you, the nuclear waste stuff is a little bit weird, but some of the other stuff in terms of deforestation, biodiversity, and other internal links to broader warming, I do think the alternative solves, which proves that it's sort of try or die for all of those solutions to engage in it.
Okay,
Grace
so
has
like,
a far better
through-
knowledge of
like,
nuclear waste,
through-
so she might have.
I have one more question. Like, so through the alternative, how do you create like renewable energies?
Like all the alternative explanation will be in the 1 R.
Okay, I mean like, okay, I guess it is all.
I can go through some of them. but the
No,
nuclear
that's,
waste one,
you're
I
good,
don't.
you're good, thanks. But also like, how do you solve for transition wars exacerbating climate change?
Like Grace will answer that when it was presented in the 2AC.
Okay, that's good, that's fine.
Yeah. Or you can say, I think it's not. Okay, the order to say that, and the woman first. Okay, it is.
Did you say the order is the calculates and the
Yeah, just. And it's sending slowly. It says it's. Okay, great. Is anyone in here not good? Okay, great.
Cap outweighs one, it causes extinction, creates massive environmental pressures that escalate in outweigh magnitude, climate change, ocean acidification, soil erosion, ozone depletion, nitrogen and phosphorus cycles, global freshwater use, biodiversity loss, air swell, including chemical pollution that systematically outweighs their internal links to the environment. Even if they were the speculative claim that renewables will address warming in the future, our impact happens faster than they can solve environmental crisis is happening now, which makes it try to for collapse to structural violence, dropped impact by the 2AC capitals, 8 million people yearly in the petrol industry alone, 700 million people alone, less than $2 per day for systemic impacts when comparing our scenarios to less than unbreakable systems like IR3, capitals and firms, every impact on advanced 2 Wilkins in 19. If you can talk about capitals and get about fashion, the people of good is such a ministry, legitimate cruelty offers all essential number of people solve problems in ways and equitable relations that are structured the groundwork for weathering populist and fascist policy plus politicized people creates enormous cultural ignorance, very simple anger and frustration, framework, counter-interpretation about containing political matters, and they contest the consequence and ideological and everything's one education question on what we should do, carries presuppositions about political subjectivity. If those are wrong, our policies will be choosers. They cannot clip away our links. It means they can't access case until they defend their ideology, Hilbers, and their team implementation of neoliberal policies, scrap new not a system of disposition and liberals and embodied in representation as position as generous become durable, they are nice reports and part of the notion of implementation appreciate the role of culture and the neoliberal expansion and seems to be the embodiment of neoliberals and they're going near the end. We hope to think of the neoliberal age, one of the first to see colonize our mind to link turns clash fashion ground track case for the topic and only functional limit and topic with going to decide our last speech and infinite from the best advantage mitigates any regression 3 reciprocity feeling attitudinal durable enforcement of antitrust despite lack of political will. The ongoing efforts from Republican court backing is utopian. It doesn't reflect what pragmatic reality that gets equal rights, desirability, not feasibility for the driver's evidence is wrong for your state of consultancy make power. In 19 counts for efforts for drill, the boundaries of possible censor more like a German generous and received more than imagination. No alt program for nocturne imposing escape render and continual false compare economics must be simply different perspectives of common history. Originally we read a Herbal and economic calamity, romantic simply defined rather than romantic. Realism drawing of mutual aid and common sensibilities need replenished victims. Experience initial decline, yet no firm you both one double line, either separate justification for antitrust reform is a moving target that's a voter for fairness, or the framework of debates mean even if actions aren't functionally competitive and the civic disagreement is sufficient for exclusivity to psyop link antitrust to make over for capital or sort of legitimacy of a broken system passed by the working class by a sign for voice and accountability for unsustainable accumulation by targeting individual corporate culprits and creates a blank check to West Union to the fucking good small businesses that's full free corporate control linked their day and evidence says quote failure of accountability for elite wrongdoing has a signature catastrophe for America, but it ignores that prioritizing profit instead of space accountability impossible. Every facet of the solvency claim is wrong because it deems the DOJ as a legitimate check against corporate consolidation, whereas the historical record is decisively negative. The Abbott, AT&T, American Express, and Google demonstrates that insofar as the profit motive is retained, antitrust will never solve foreign democracy, link the presumption of democratic peace. Greece is a bill for the overall interventions that outweigh Milter and 21,000 weeks of democracy and pyramids where possible were central element of democracy, political equality, equals economic equality, generating capital civilization, fastest president and fully ending the middle class right, support by capitalist finance and challenging liberal order, COVID pandemic, increasing quality, democratic and capitalism, legitimacy, democratic parties are losing voter share and public support, and no firm double line one case are not counterpoints and components of the alternative. They're not the other. Every answer according to both applies one to the firm is the same as the antitrust attempts to create small mandate solutions and with reinforcing competition. This way the working class for system overhaul to neoliberals and its mentality through conduct. You can't distinguish neoliberals and competition policy against the power system. We've criticized competition inside of universality. Rationality is what we criticize as sustainability debate growth is unstable when carbon gold, peak oil, daily 14 is wrong. In 1985, price of oil, so little industry and assets for investors and believers in speaking energy transition because of the abandonment of pipelines, power plants, and industries of 100 trillion trillion. The carbon bubble legislation class of industrial civilization consider between 23 and 30 US will be caught between follow from peak oil to financialization mass and 20 markets about economics, explain economic method, and only follow the moves to which commerce when everything reproduced antagonism money free for all businesses hoping to get a lot of competition when enough companies open markets saturated sales and agents grow because of overproduction. Competition reproduces crowd repeatedly versus different overproduction otherwise profitably inside the economy and towards competition we save cabins in their cars accumulation and class has no lives important. Crack system 3 mineral cycles avenue and 20 endless growth mineral scarcity electrification requires markets power light and battery economy hits line of mineral copper lithium and magnesium due to demand every high pricing with environmental lithium by 42 managers 38 bottlenecks come early existing sites that account for wiring as well as difficulties in recycling 4 speculation foster and all 21 speculative crimes plus price financial industry capital economy led to asset bubbles and growing threats of world economic method every set of recruiting disturbance and serious economic repercussions material authorities pump cash only to retain greater levels leading to crash speculative means place reproductive investment generating problems without production of overall unit financial conversation public money versus 87 91 01 and 08 all bubbles were but international corporations intensify concentration over accumulation and financialization cash is a tax haven. The alternative is both likely and try or die. One, there's a range of benefits for universal basic income, healthcare, childcare, food, guarantees, protections, higher minimum wage, alienates, government, Chile, the European Nation, personal economic improved bottom up movements have been successful. It's succeeding now. Local, little, and 1960 was considered that was a political thought, even in Nigeria, economics, who have already challenged with the all affirmation, finance fees, opportunities, social connection for every one, but they have environmental ceiling ideas, global impact, pandemic answers to government adjusting, 3 seats before New Zealand's government prioritized president for no over growth planning, low risk growth, and carbon future solves things like waste because they would recognize it as a collective problem that the government is able to solve better than corporations with a profit incentive to deal with an environmental catastrophe. No transition worse. 1, is mitigated by the alternative and current impacts of profit improvement worse than inevitable. 2, their evidence is offensively bad. 2, classics proves it says nothing. It's nonsensical. The democratic countries will somehow find this to be the Cold War and will attack the U.S. for public provisioning of goods. 3, are all solves all their transition bad arguments. It's not economic class. Cynical. And 20, we figured GDP growth is sanctions. You keep growing GDP, go at a local point, you keep growing to evidence to spend 30 years of research, particularly the high incubation, so you keep growing to improve your sharing income, and investing in public universal provisions. These lowering vision is not anti-tech, prevent our growth, technological research is not happening. Growth independent economy is supposed to grow, allocate resources more rationally and more democratically enabled to live flourishing lives and balance with the ecosystems. Lastly, the app process warming 1. Their evidence they read the 2 C's about renewables, and 2 C's read evidence that those fail. 2, the only other war is the alt fails. That was answered above 3, believe 20 evidence, sad, nothing, leaks evidence. It was not read. We get new answers. The 1 AR reads it, and I'm going to move up to the transition wars today. And history proves that there's no transition wars. Well, in 20 do nothing. You usually academic predictions about how much for the impact they would be likely to war use. As much 20 was the unrelated declinisation of servers, was simply the one going to treat primary motivation security, not economic gain, inflation link plus 21 natural limits and scarcity stuff, energy procedure, actually social supply and actually social stuff. Answer who gets what? Sorry, that was the classy part I marked it. Who gets what?
656 starting now. 238. It's been sent. I'll just wait till everyone has the document in order and Elijah is.
Success.
Are you good now that
I guess in order.
Okay, well, sorry, I just lost myself for a second. It's
They
gonna
was
be,
ready.
yeah, it's gonna be the DOJ advantage, the inflation advantage, CWST, and then it's gonna be the cap rate.
Got a thumbs up from Mr. Garrett.
How much? Let's see if Lincoln is good. Lincoln, are you good? Everyone's thumbs up on this one.
Wait, I lost it in, oh, okay, found it. I lost it in there. Alright.
Okay, I'm gonna just. Okay. On advantage, whenever not going for non-advantage too. Their main push was that inflation is not happening in the markets right now, but that is not true. Story inflation is companies using the pandemic as a pretext for price gouging. There's no other explanation. Companies have more profit now than before the pandemic. They're actually boasting about it. They admit that they're price gouging in CEO surveys and earnings calls. That's the data and store evidence which they have functionally conceded. And self-interest proves they're basically not to price gouge. They're using the pandemic as the scapegoat, and they're just functionally misunderstanding that. And all their evidence is, like, our store evidence is much better because it takes market analysis to comparative analysis. Because you see that when inflation should be like 3.6%, when it's actually 6.8%. That is the important distinction that we're making right now. Our single evidence says that self-interest proves. However, we resolve this because automatic investigations into tax solution lead to rapid price drop because beef and steel proof. In days when Kennedy went after steel and also went back after beef. That's the same. Right to repair proves target corrections were ran interest action into quick monetary action by Microsoft and Apple. That's day. Next they say that we don't increase renewable adoption. Yes, we do because we make them much cheaper, but inflation is making them skyrocket. So fossil fuels much more important to them right now. However, we reverse that and they reduce it because they kind of renewable solve climate change because they reduce the amount of emissions that actually go from fossil fuel burning. Secondly, the populism arguments are a bit new. Oh, my 1 second. Am I going to go 3 points, Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay, go. Okay, my it's whatever. And so we're seeing that there is a reduction of fossil. We're going to see a reduction of fossil fuels post affirmative. Next, we resolve populism because populism use inflation as an example. That is empirical. In that that's empirical that populists use inflation as an example. However, we resolve that. And that's resolve a large scale existential impact that they conceded coming out of the block. Their second argument is the grid resilient. They say it doesn't collapse that inflation is solved, but yes, renewable adoption leads to a more resilient grid and better usage of the grid. And that's a good thing. And also the Fed solves. Not the Fed. Yeah, the federal government solved. The Fed decided the problem is not inflation, it's price gouging. They're trying to fix the wrong thing on warming. Renewables solve it, warming good inflation records that cost 16 strong, but renewables make it strong, create resilience. That resolves it. And on populism and inflation and both populist. That's sounds like good. They came up and said that there's no empirical examples, but we've never seen an empirical example of price gouging was solved. Now, first on expanded scope. Is now changes the expanded scope of Sherman to cover tax inclusion. That's one AC bottle installer. Tax inclusion is legal now. Things for 20. Speaking of your competitors, according parts may be illegal, but you don't need firms to actually talk to each other to cooperate. Tax inclusion is legal. And core antitrust law price fixing is a core Sherman Act law question. That's the one AC bottle and one AC installer. So we're saying that the core antitrust law is Sherman Clayton or the other one. And it's inflation is an antitrust issue. Inflation is a core antitrust issue. Standard 21. 22. The name terms be used to combat inflation, community consequences, control not lawful outside the market power, which is defined as raising prices. And that's what we mean because we changed the core antitrust laws, which one extends to the CWS to remove tacit collusion, which is a legal thing now. Next on their argument, Afron outweighs because under their interpretation, there's only 3 after a topic, which is pro worker welfare and changing the CWS. That is super. That's just super small topic for only 3 that killed a bunch of stuff. And technically, Next, they said that it's more leaning on the literature. That is just not true statistically. There's a 56% win rate for negative teams, so this is a more negative leaning topic than any other one. So we get killed in every single round when they have core generics and really specific small stuff, and they can do all that, whatnot. Now, functional limits also check the state CP has a bunch of literature to solve all that, whatnot, and also, yeah, they have core generics and whatnot. Next one, education. They don't outweigh on education. Our education is better because we expand the topic to create a smaller one and limits. We don't like under limit the topic. We have a amount of limits that is good enough. Our interpretation proves ongoing comment. We solve that. And next, extend reasonability because our interpret is reasonably topical talks about anti-competitive practice and like that. Okay. Extend framework, which is the way the affirmative key to clash and advocacy skills. They have dropped that because one, advocacy skills resolve their movements all because if you learn how to test and like find out the best strategy, you become a better advocate for your movement. Specifically when they talk about their movements coming up with like better housing and UBS, they have to do that through careful policy considerations and argumentation that resolve that. Now, they're interpreting about ourselves from their arbitrary. How does one okay. How do they like Peru age? Like their framework is bad. You focus on the affirmative first because it improves the material conditions of work by reducing inflation. That is the Jarvis evidence. Their framework is bad because it leads to endless debates and a lack of material action, which is a bad thing and kills a lot of people, and that's just kind of a problem. Not y'all. Transition wars totally happen whenever countries shift to capitalism when they got global movement, specifically when it's like other countries like Bolivia get shift to more socialist measures, they get coup or they get intervened with by Western countries. Specifically, if you look at Evo Morales, he was in jail for quite a long time. Well, he had to exile himself to Mexico for quite a long time because of capitalist countries that wanted to have access to lithium. That obviously is going to happen. And they don't solve this. It's been 19. He goes, multi-decade electrical degradation of climate is not decade socialism, he has higher emissions of capitalist has managed to decrease emission space with enriching people or the climate. Leadership demand cuts will have trouble staying in power. The metro delays reducing turnover requires tax lower when nuclear has less carbon free production, 7,000 pounds in 46 countries. Found jobs and costs of solar, wind power, and back in the day. Renewables cheap enough to outprice fossil fuels. The reason for 84% decrease coal plants, survival existing plants will be should never always victory achieve private industry, market private industry, and peak oil is wrong. Box 19. Numerous innovations to electricity, biomass, geothermal power, advanced more weather independent resources, compared to scarce, general, especially promising numerous surplus power, the methane or hydrogen, transportability, availability may be augmented by high voltage transition like more. And we resolve that with new law because we got renewables, underneath our and no resources, new reserves and devitalization chapter cap 20. We're not going to run out of no reserves. Our much larger limits to the rest of devitalization and certain reserves, capitalism, and mind. Resource scarcity is only we need to worry about. There's some very big issues with profitizing and financialization overrated. Ability to the financial is wiggling the economy, despite rhetoric now. Finance and insurance peak well before the financial crisis. Employment has been downtrend. Market downtrend. And growth the environment day. One with growth and sustainable drive to tech innovation. Darkness ignores regular game changes that radically reduce substitutes. Try only new tech. Telecom their way to what's carbon making happen. So we eliminate emissions. We need these sector room to avoid disaster. Enemy control. Unique solution is actually the cleaning out for items inside the most can obvious and 5 renewables 12. So we're going to massive cost of serves the Europeans and clean energy transition having now. And I'm out of time.
Good, 7.
Yes.
How much
We didn't use any prep.
are you going to go with?
Well, we'll start it, but we might.
Like, can I go have a cigarette outside?
Yeah, we'll start.
I'm sure.
Mass waiting is. I get so tired of this.
We have the recording, so it's all good.
No perm, right?
I'm going to say this on camera. I got to quit hitting Google bars. Oh my God.
So we didn't go to
Get around to watch.
Grace, I might have to just speak on your thing because my thing's just not.
Oh, we haven't been here that long.
No, it's not even connecting to hotspots.
Okay.
But we have to wait for that anyways. It's in this area called Decatur. It's pretty close. It's pretty close to like the main.
My roommate's from Gwinnett County, so.
Oh, yeah, that's pretty close.
Trying to guess what's in our answer, I know. That was some good judge prep.
That, I'm not different.
Lincoln, are you here?
Let's take a judge press.
Yep. Okay. Order is the captain.
Are you going to take it all or just the pay?
Just a K. Is anyone not ready?
Capitalism, class distinction, now, climate change, solar erosion, water destruction, nitrogen in the carbon cycle make it inevitable and always on magnitude because it's the only irreversible impact we access populism directly because we run a car, specifically in the one that talks about how economic misery makes the assumption that market solves all problems has laid the groundwork for right-wing populism and fascism by depoliticizing individuals and creating a future of ignorance as the Wilkins evidence. And we also turn it axis advantage too because markets can't solve it. We'll pass a tipping point before they see the market signals, and the 1% won't invest enough in green tech since they can buy their way out of the crisis, and the only people that will be affected are poor. That all proves the money sees gains over capitalism are unsustainable, regulated capitalism fails, and transition wars are all inevitable, which means there's no uniqueness for any other offense, and all flips all solvency calculations to try or die. The framework debate, this matters for how you evaluate alternative solvency debate, is a question of should, not could, action on behalf of the alternative, or sidestepping around a political reality, and we have linked the case, which means we still win another interpretation in a world where the money are conceded. The link debate, the clash and advocacy arguments are just not something that they access. The counter interpretation of evaluating political imaginary still solves these. We have clash and links to the plan action. We let them win the case, and if they're able to win the thesis that of the critique, which is that antitrust policy is bad and recreates the impacts that they're trying to weigh, any other explanation and justifies excluding the antitrust paper, the regulations counterpoint, because it's too good at beating the core question of the resolution. It is a contrived way to avoid engaging coordinate generics on a topic with zero discount ground. It all proves that if they're still embedded in capitals and competitive frameworks, they have no capacity for advocacy skills to in any way access the movements that we're creating, because they all directly contradict the end goal of all of those movements. Now, the education debate, the material conditions argument about how they help the most people and make the most material change certainly hurts them more than it helps them. Learning how to make the existing system more effective is bad in the context where the system is violent, because we should ask ourselves why it exists in the first place. Their perspective of failure is an ahistorical falsehood pushed by corporate control to cover up for the rising resistance that is specifically forcing them into forceful retreat. That's the Hilbert's evidence. If there is a naive utopian position, this idea that the system has caused us mass death and mass environmental collapse should somehow be sustained. It's not self-serving or arbitrary or bad for fairness because they drop the reciprocity standard, which is terminal defense, to each of their arguments on framework. Fiat was created and is abused of for the affirmative to be able to beat circumvention. Otherwise, they lose every debate to Trump hates the plan. Their fiating of the plan overrides all political reality of status quo antitrust enforcement. The next should equally get to test the desirability of should action, not feasibility. They can say the alternative is bad with literally any defense of the private sector or reason that it doesn't solve the app, but like the negative can't win the debate on Trump courts block the app shouldn't have to bring this debate in the inverse. And if they're wrong about it, they're negative on presumption because we've linked the case and have circumvention arguments that they can feel that every judge, Congress member, and corporation durably complies with the affirmative that we can solve any other impacts. They're also wrong about the alternative and all their arguments about transition wars. There's a global socialist movement with Ujama in Tanzania, Fidelis in Spain, Senza in Colombia, the CSC in New Delhi. The law proves that pre-modern customs and traditions provide centuries of blueprint for the socialist movements of the alternative. It all is supported by data and analysis that we read in the context of McCarran and Swig evidence that specifically talks about how there's a package of socialist scholarship that is occurring now that the affirmative is completely inconsistent with. There's no transition wars. Why? Our evidence is a global economic collapse. That's not what the alternative is. The one in our Hinkle evidence explains that there would be no absurd overreaction to the simple idea that we don't need to keep growing our GDP. Most countries and voters agree that we need income sharing and universal public goods. 2, no war. The U.S. has suffered 40 recessions, yet only 20 wars have occurred, interstate wars have occurred, and less than 5% of those were actually involving the economy. Now, the Smith 19 evidence is about the Soviet Union. It assumes a mass socialist violent dictatorship. That's not the alternative. That was clear in the one in R. The alternative endorses state actions such as blocking corporations from blocking regulations, actually stopping and capping tagging, incentivizing carbon sequestration instead of leaving it out, and actually building and not building new thermal coal plants. That's none of what the evidence is describing as something that would be bad or cause any of their impacts. Renewables don't solve any of their impacts, but do provide us a straight turn to the case. I'll go to the sustainability debate now because capitalism is unsustainable. We're not extending peak flows because they dropped selling bubbles, following the abandonment of pipelines, ocean platforms, energy generation plants, and industries lose 100 trillion stranded, creating the greatest carbon bubble in history. Imminent collapse is happening between 23 and 30, which means that the critique always on time frame and access to the case are faster than they can solve. That's the Franklin evidence. We can't move to better systems or innovate around that because there's such a high exit cost in the context of the carbon bubble market. The thesis of there being a bubble is that all big companies invested in oil and gas, so they have incentives to block any transition to green technology or to solar. 2N and Payne evidence explain why only the alternative can solve that instance of warning. Even if they provide effective renewables, we still face soil degradation, deforestation, which proves that they don't solve the necessary internal links to their impact of warming. Now, the financialization stuff dooms green tech innovation and answers their Bailey evidence. It's from 2016, like zero studies. The app still continues the back and forth market correction that always ends in market failure because the drive for profit specifically causes the market to overreach equilibrium. Those cycles continue until the bus is inevitably subsequent boom
which is the reason why none of their green tech technology will ever be implemented. That's the jobs evidence. Now, the link was conceded about the 1 year, which means Ukraine is a direct trade-off between the plan and the alternative. The plan is the newest iteration of New Deal, Keynesian warfare, historical record of antitrust is decisively negative. The language of tacit collusion and fighting inflation is the same rhetoric that upheld capital accumulation. Sherman was enacted because of the 1888 recession and concentration of power of roller companies. That in turn caused the panic of 1910 and leading to Clinton and the FTC Act. All of that is examples of how we blame them for the consequences of antitrust, but then we still see inflation in the 70s. We still see these impacts recreating themselves because antitrust doesn't actually target any of the worker issues in the labor market that are happening broadly in the context of the economy. That's the wolf evidence. Renewables don't solve any of their impacts. No energy source has undergone a sustained decline because a new one became available. Cheaper renewables will immediately be used to intensify growth and profits. It's specifically proven now in the context of how we replace biofuels with fossil fuels. But then we needed the need for overproduction under capitalism led to petroleum overuse, which in turn intensified deforestation and whaling. It's proven with renewables now under capitalism. Increased renewables only led to overall energy consumption because under the veil that it's cheap, we think we can increase carbon dioxide, which proves that we just outtest the dirty industries and just cause more of these impacts.
Okay, 2:38, starting now. Okay, that's fine. Oh my gosh. Okay, let me unmute and make sure. Thinking you good? Okay, thumbs up from Lincoln.
You lost your mouse.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. And y'all good for an order? Okay. It's going to be the inflation advantage and then the K.
Populism literally turns any of their impacts. How are we going to solve for climate change when we have people in the world that don't believe any of the experts in our societies, don't believe that warming actually
the coronavirus and its existence, populism turns any way to solve any of their impacts. Therefore, you only have to vote affirmative to solve populism. They say that you can. They say that climate change turns populism, but the problem is that they were the cap key against an affirmative that solves climate change. This means that any of their climate change impacts are literally solved by the 1AC. This is a big mistake for the two NR, and their only pushback against the 1NC is that renewables don't solve warming, but their evidence on why renewables don't solve warming isn't specific to renewables. It's specific to green tech or nuclear, green tech or nuclear energy, which the app is not. They give no empirical reason as to why renewables don't solve warming, but we give reasons. So normal prices solves warming because the prices are falling more than anticipated. It's a game changer. It's called a tech miracle by Wood and Krug evidence and leads to rapid fossil fuel displacement. We are not going to be using fossil fuels under when renewables are cheap enough to be replaced by them. The only reason we use fossil fuels in the status quo is because they're cheaper. But by decreasing these prices, and there's no pushback by decreasing these prices, we can replace them and solve for climate change. There's no pushback by this by the negative. Therefore, you have to see that the only one that is solving warming in this debate is the affirmative. And on to the K. First on the framework debate, we're not going for framework, but we need to understand that the negative does not get fiat because this makes it impossible to be affirmative in any debate. If negative gets fiat, this means that they can. No. If the negative is able to fiat their if the negative is able to fiat their alternative, it means that if the negative is able to fiat their alternative, it means that they can fiat solving for anything that the PAN poses by a policy action, but it doesn't actually look at what happens when the policies are implemented or when their alternatives are implemented. They can't fiat. They can't create fiat, and they can't. And on transition wars, all of the examples of global movements are in the 1NC evidence and over in the 1NR evidence. But Indian movements were shut down by BGP. Tanzanian movements are surveilled by Africa and by coups in Chile, Bolivia, through socialist transitions lead to massive instability and wars that totally occur. This is our Smith 19 card. It shows that transition wars do happen, and this is not just the United States shutting down on the military. So if they say they get fiat in the United States, that's fine. But any Western leader outside of the United States will shut down on them, as shown through any socialist movement in the other country. And then one of our evidence is about Amsterdam. Amsterdam doesn't prove the basis of the alternative because they rolled back rent controls on affordable housing. This is not the revolution that the negative is calling for. And our Carlson evidence is a description of the reactions from capitalist countries when Guyana, Libya, and Vietnam went to socialists. He was invaded them and maintained massive military presences. When Malaysia attempted revolution in the United Kingdom, they used counter-terror tactics against them. When Croatia the imprisonment in Croatia, the French deployed military troops there. This shows that the alternative can never solve. And their evidence doesn't assume the national security is still believing in the domino effect, means they totally do invade. And 20 wars happened during 40 recessions. That's a 50% probability that war does occur, but our evidence outlines the ideology and fear of communism that also drives their innovation and intervention. More on the renewables debate. When they say financialization makes it so capitalism fails. This is why government intervention is key. By prohibiting tacit collusion, we are decreasing the profit motive that allows these companies to exploit people. When we decrease the profit motive through antitrust, we can solve for all of their impacts without exacerbating climate change through things like transition wars. And they say that there's not going to be an energy transition. But in the last 20 years alone, we've seen a great energy transition away from fossil fuels. As during the Obama administration, when we've seen subsidies for things like solar panels and a more widespread use of them when the technology was available for them to be used. So this argument that there's no energy transition doesn't make any sense. And they say that the plan upholds capitalism, but if we have to have the illusion of upholding capitalism, otherwise nothing will get done. Because since they can't be out the alternative, it means that we have to have something that can make actually in, because you can't walk to a Trump rally and say socialism without getting beaten up. We need to see what is like capable of being passed in the status quo without totally tearing apart the world in America, like and America totally creating worse climate change. The only way to solve for any of these impacts is doing it through a filter that people understand. And they give examples of how like Woodrow Wilson uses antitrust to make capitalism like succeed, but don't look at the effects that antitrust had on creating better labor laws for people involved and lowering prices for everyone. Antitrust can be used for good. Yes, it does. Yes, it upholds capitalism, but upholding capitalism is the only way to solve for populism, the only way to solve for climate change. And the alternative gives no reasoning as to how they're solving for climate change, rather how we aren't, but they don't look at the 20s.
Good debate.